I'm Gloria Waters, and I'm the Dean of the College of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences, Sargent College, in case I don't know you. And it's really a pleasure to welcome you to the 14th Annual Dudley Allen Sargent Lecture. The Dudley Allen Sargent Lecture was started in 1999 on the 70th anniversary of Sargent College joining Boston University. And I'm really honored to have Dr. Alan Jette be our distinguished lecturer today. And I'm really honored because, in fact, Dr. Jette was the Dean of Sargent College from 1996 to 2004, and he, in fact, was the person who started this lecture series. So it's really nice to invite him here to actually deliver the lecture. He's been to many of these. The idea behind the Dudley Allen Sargent Lecture was to give the Boston University and the Boston community an opportunity to interact with lead researchers and practitioners in the health and rehabilitation fields. Dr. Jette is currently a professor of health policy and management at the Boston University School of Public Health. He directs the Boston University Health and Disability Research Institute, the Boston Rehabilitation Outcomes Measurement Center, and is the director of the New England Regional Spinal Cord Injury Center. And his work currently focuses on the development and dissemination of contemporary outcome measures and instruments to evaluate the quality of healthcare. Dr. Jette was originally a physical therapist by training, and then he received an MPH and a PhD in the area of public health, and he served on the faculty of MGH-IHP prior to coming here to Boston University. He's received numerous honors, among which are he received the Distinguished Public Service Award in 2010 from the American Academy of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. He was awarded the Excellence in Rehabilitation of Aging Persons Award by the Gerontological Society of America in 2011. And he was the Mary McMillan Lecturer for the American Physical Therapy Association in 2012, which is a very prestigious award. So I'm waiting to see what your award's going to be this year, because you've had one each of the past 3 years. So my expectations are high, Alan. And today he's going to talk about the future of healthcare with a very provocative title, which is called Face into the Storm. So thank you, Alan.
Thanks, Gloria. Well, it really is an honor and a privilege to be here with you today. And as Gloria said, it's very special because I remember all the work we did in putting together and planning these lectures. So to be asked to give one of them is a very distinct honor, and I'm really delighted to be able to do it. And Gloria nicely set me up with, of course, my title, Face into the Storm. I really appreciate all of you who have faced into the storm today to be here. It's not easy to make that arrangement, and I worked hard at that and take full credit. And I'm delighted to have a chance to talk about this topic to an interdisciplinary audience. Gloria mentioned that I originally gave this talk as part of the Mary McMillan Lecture Award, and this is a very prestigious award that's given by my professional association, the American Physical Therapy Association. It was started in 1963, and the purpose of it was to pay tribute to the founder of physical therapy, Mary McMillan. There's Mary. And it's an opportunity for the profession to acknowledge someone who they feel has made distinguished contributions to the field and to the profession. And most importantly, it gives the awardee an opportunity really for a bully pulpit to say what he or she wants to say to the profession through a special lecture that's given annually at the annual conference. So in June, I had that distinct honor of doing it for the 43rd Mary McMillan Lecture at the annual meeting in Tampa, Florida. And in the beginning of my lecture tonight, I want to stop for a moment and thank both Gloria and Bob Meenan, who chipped in to support a reception that was given following my lecture in Tampa. It was greatly appreciated. And even more importantly, they chipped in for a gift that was given to an organization that's very near and dear to my heart, the New England Disabled Sports Organization, which operates up in New Hampshire primarily and uses sport to try to improve the lives of individuals affected by disability. And that's a group that I've been coaching with in adaptive skiing for the past 10, 11 years. So that was greatly appreciated by them and by me. So Mary McMillan, who died in 1959, is seen as really one of the chief pioneers of my clinical profession of physical therapy. She was the first physical therapy aide who was sworn into service during World War I, and she trained other Reconstruction aides, and she became known as the mother of physical therapy. And then during World War II, she also was pressed into service. She treated prisoners of war while she was enduring the rigors of internment by the Japanese in Manila and in Shanghai. She had a very distinguished career. There have been 42 lecturers who preceded me, and as many have stated in their lectures, I too began my journey. They give you a year to prepare a lecture. I've never taken that amount of time to prepare a lecture in my entire life. And it was quite frightening, to be honest with you. And what was particularly frightening is about 2 months after being notified that I was to give the award, of course I sat back and figured 12 months, I mean, I've got lots of time. They contacted me 2 or 3 months after that and said, we'd like your title, so they could begin publication or whatever they do. And I don't know how you all do it, but for me, one of the last things that I do in a talk is the title. I can't do a title until I figured out what it is I'm going to talk about. So that really put the fear of God in me. So I had to figure out what I was going to say so I could come up with a title and they could do what they wanted to do. So I rushed to read 42 lectures that had preceded me, and it was quite illuminating to see the insights over the decades and the history of the physical therapy profession, and the fascinating glimpse into what was going on in the minds of many of the leaders throughout that history of our profession. What particularly struck me as I read through those McMillan lectures is that almost without exception, the lecturers since 1975 came back to one lecture that was provided by this individual, Helen Hislop. And she entitled her lecture in 1975, The Not So Impossible Dream. She was also a leader in our profession. She was chair and professor of the Department of Biokinesiology and Physical Therapy for several decades, 1968 through 1998. She was widely recognized in the field for her superb thinking, and she was a brilliant writer. And she was an editor of our professional journal for a long period of time. And speakers, year after year, came back to McMillan's Not So Impossible Dream. So I was particularly interested in going back and reading that. I didn't go to her lecture. I was a physical therapist at that point. It was held out in Anaheim, and I didn't have the funding to go out there, and to be honest, nor the interest in 1975. I didn't say that in Tampa, though. Her McMillan lecture was really quite remarkable, and I want to just give you a little taste of it. It was unvarnished Hislop. I had the opportunity to know her, and she's retired, living in North Carolina now. It was erudite, it was thoughtful. What was really quite striking to me, though, was the extent to which it was fearless and very challenging. It wasn't one of these lovely journeys through the profession, which some of them are, and which are nice, but hers was very different. She characterized her profession as one that was at that time in the midst of an identity crisis, and she challenged the profession as one that had not arrived and one whose survival was very much in doubt, and a profession that was searching for its distinction and its regard going forward in the future. She challenged us in our profession that our intellect was vagabond, that we were neglecting the history of ideas and the need for identity at our peril. And she accused us as being ingenious Philistines and guilty of intellectual treason. I couldn't imagine sitting in the audience hearing that and then, applauding. All the Philistines applauding Helen Hislop. So it had to be a remarkable experience to sit there and listen to it. She warned that although outside forces, and we as professionals are always worried about those outside forces that are impinging upon us. She said that although outside forces were working to retard the profession's progress, she acknowledged that. She said that our soft underbelly was the disarray in our scientific foundation. And for me, she went right to the heart of it. She said that's what was leaving us wide open for attack against the inadequacies of our own profession and attacks from government, from fiscal agencies, and from the consuming public. She laid the blame on ourselves as a profession. And as I thought back, that's the time I graduated into my field in 1973. And I could identify with what she was talking about because I came into the field at the same time. And I recall in my education in the 1970s that I was very concerned about the disarray in understanding. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. When I was a physical therapy student, I would go to lectures provided by my physical therapy professors, say in neurophysiology. And then I would go in the university. I was at the State University of New York at Buffalo, where we had a very strong neurophysiology department. And Beverly Bishop, one of the leaders in neurophysiology, was teaching undergraduate neurophysiology. I'd go to her lectures. And there was really no connection between what the physical therapy professors were teaching me about neurophysiology and what I was learning in my neurophysiology lectures, and it bothered me a great deal. It bothered me a great deal. And the other example I will give you is how embarrassed I was when I finally got out into clinical practice as a student before graduation. I went to my inpatient rehabilitation rotation, and I was working with an individual who had suffered a stroke, and I was doing bow bath techniques. And those of you in physical therapy know all about bow bath. And a neurologist stopped in to the gym where I was working, stuck his head around the curtain where I was doing my thing, and I was feeling really good. And he looked at me, and all he said was, "Hocus pocus." I'll never forget it. And then he walked away, didn't say another word. And I'm thinking, whoa, what have I gotten myself into? So, to begin my lecture, I want to go back to Hislop, and I want to use something that really struck me in her lecture, which is where I drew the title for my talk today. And she talked about, and I quote, "It's old knowledge in Scotland that the sheep who stand on a rise of ground and face into the storm survive, while those which huddle together for warmth in the low places frequently are suffocated in the snowdrifts." And I thought, wow, okay, that's what I want to talk about. And so their face into the storm is where my title comes from. For me, the rehabilitation professions and my profession of physical therapy has come very far since those days in the early 1970s. As I look back and look at my profession today, much of what I think Hislop talked about in 1975 has been realized. Not completely, but much of it has been. And it's by the courage, the dedication, and the vision of those who have come before us over the past 4 decades. Today's physical therapy profession, and I suspect the other rehab professions, but I don't know as much about them, physical therapy is clearly not the profession I entered in 1975. Or 1973, nor is it the profession that Hislop talked about in 1975. Contemporary physical therapy, in my view, is vibrant. It has a clear and compelling identity. It has an essential distinction as a profession. I think it's quite unique in what it offers, and I think it has a compelling regard for the future. I think the profession has survived, and yes, I think it has in fact flourished over the past decades by doing precisely what Hislop said in 1975 we needed to do, and that is provide a distinct and valuable service to our patients. As I look at our profession as someone who works a great deal outside of physical therapy, I don't think we're either irrelevant nor are we redundant. I think physical therapy is respected and it's valued as a member of the healthcare team today. I think we're well on our way to grasping the control of the scientific foundation of our clinical practice. Now, we're not there, but I think we've come a long way since 1975. And I must say, as I work with physical therapists in our national association, sometimes I get the feeling that others outside of our field see that more clearly than we ourselves see. I think we still have, in some respects, an inferiority complex as healthcare professionals. I'll give you some examples. For me, the single most striking change that I have witnessed as a scientist with a background in physical therapy is the creation of a highly skilled and highly talented cadre of physical therapy clinical scientists. These are the individuals who today are forging the clinical scientific foundation of our profession. This is a development that Hislop argued was absolutely essential to our future destiny. And I think the science underpinning our practice is no longer in its infancy. Yes, we're still not into full maturity. We're probably into adolescence, well on our way to maturity, but clearly not in our infancy. And I've seen that over the past 3 decades. When I started my work as a scientist, there were very few physical therapists who were doing top-notch research, clinical research in physical therapy. I have personally perceived how people have viewed physical therapists and physical therapy scientists differently over the past decades. And I'll give you, again, an example from my own personal experience. In 1990, the NIH convened a task force. They brought together over 100 clinical scientists and clinicians in Hunt Valley, Maryland, to examine the adequacy of NIH research in rehabilitation. And out of that task force, which contained over 100 scientists, there were 2 physical therapists. And the report laid the foundation for what became the National Center for Medical Rehabilitation Research. And it's just celebrated its 20th anniversary as part of the NIH. And it too has come a long ways in 20 very short years. Now, last year, there was a new director for the institute in which the National Center resides, and he put up a 13-member blue ribbon panel. And he, as the new director of the institute, he wanted this blue ribbon panel to evaluate the progress that had been made in rehabilitation research over the past 20 years, and then talk about some of the future challenges. This panel, which had 13 members, was co-chaired by a physical therapy clinical scientist, and it contained 3 members who were physical therapists and 1 who was an occupational therapist. In 20 years. I mean, it was incredible for me to see the change. I am confident in stating that I believe the time has come for the rehabilitation professions to move boldly, to face into the gathering storms of our current century. That's what I'm here to say tonight. That's what I think we need to do. We need to be bold looking into the future. And I want to challenge rehab professionals to look outside of our own individual professions with confidence, with a vision for the 21st century. My fear is that to do otherwise is really to huddle together for the warmth in the low places of our comfort zone. And I think that is the one thing that will put our survival in jeopardy if we don't face boldly into the challenges of the new century. The 20th century is over. We got to get over that. Now, in 2000, another McMillan lecturer, Ruth Purtill Oh, who also was affiliated with Sargent early in her career and then was over at the MGH. She characterized several early periods of the profession of physical therapy where she, in her view, felt the profession had correctly read the landscape. And she concluded with confidence that society was ready for us as professionals to plant the seeds of our professional ethic. And she called these early seasons as the period of self-identity and the period of patient-focused identity. In the first, Purtill Oh recalled how we had established the moral foundation for a true professional relationship with other professions, physicians and other healthcare professionals. While in the second early period, we established the moral foundations for a true professional relationship with our patients and our clients. Now, my desire is for a professional vision in rehabilitation that grows out of a culture that has matured beyond those early periods to the third, that Purtill Oh refers to as the period of societal identity, where the challenge is different. It's to establish the moral foundations for a professional partnering with the larger community of citizens and institutions to become full partners in society, which means breaking away, not leaving behind, but breaking beyond those early periods where our focus was on self-identity and our specific patients. Now, in my view, today, we live in turbulent times. Storms are all around us. And I believe the storms of radical change are gathering, and there are many, many things I could point to, but the one that I really want to focus on is the 2010 passage of the Affordable Care Act. I think we will look back at that legislation like I look back at the passage of Medicare and Medicaid when before I came into the field, but they were just getting cemented into society when I became a professional. And I think we're going to be looking back at the ACA much like we now look back at Medicare and Medicaid. As this and other healthcare reforms are implemented, I think it's going to be imperative that we as rehabilitation professionals look beyond our inward-directed professional focus and stand together on that rise of ground to face into the storms that we're facing. I don't think we have a good alternative. We have to face the healthcare needs of our society, and we have to do that with courage and self-assurance that we can be successful in doing that. And be assured as who we are as healthcare professionals and confident that we have something unique to offer society. I hear rehab professionals all the time talk about their fear of all the changes going on and whether or not we're going to be left behind. And my fear is that we're going to take that attitude. Instead, the attitude of huddling together, talking among ourselves and talking about all these horrible changes that are occurring, instead of embracing them and really showing society what we have to offer as professionals. There is no surfeit of storms that I could talk about, and I'm just going to talk about 3 storms. The first one, lack of access to health care. And many of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with the statistics. 91 million people in America have inadequate or no health care insurance, and about 1/3 of the population of the wealthiest country on this planet. In my professional view, this is a tragedy beyond comprehension. Among the most developed countries in the world, we continue to set the pace for unmet care needs of our citizens, which I think is a dubious distinction. The second, the age wave. And by the way, for you boomers in the audience, you will recognize the iconic photo on the left. That, of course, comes from Woodstock. Those of you who don't recognize it, get over it. That's Woodstock. But what many of you probably don't recognize, those same individuals in the front there are on the cover of the Gerontologist. The same 2 individuals. I thought, whoa. Whoa. Yeah. Talk about storm. So we all know America is experiencing a demographic shift of enormous magnitude, increasing longevity, declining fertility, the aging of the boomers, and it's triggering an enormous age wave in our society. The boomers have begun turning 65, and it's heralding a seismic shift in demographics, not only in the United States, but worldwide. And it has the potential, in my view, of creating a tsunami of disability. That's what scares me as a professional, one who's very interested in disability. If, as a society, we don't prepare appropriately, and I fear that we have not faced into that storm. By the year 2035 in the US, 1 in 5 people will be 65 or older, and this has profound implications for society, for policymakers, and for business. The boomer generation is looking forward to a life expectancy that is higher than any seen before in the history of humankind. And with the age wave will come an increase in the incidence and the prevalence of chronic, potentially disabling conditions. Such conditions include heart disease, diabetes, asthma. They're now the leading causes of illness, disability, and death in our population. Yet, we've known this for decades, despite that, our healthcare system remains acute care oriented and episodic. I mean, the disconnect is profoundly disturbing to me. So storm number 2. And then this is storm number 2. And then storm number 3, the escalation in healthcare costs. In 2011, Americans spent over $2.7 trillion on healthcare services. $2.7 trillion. Healthcare costs have been rising dramatically for years. In 2008, America spent over twice the rate of the other developed countries. 16% of our gross domestic product has been spent on healthcare. The second biggest spender was France at 11%, and the average for developed countries was 9%. So it's not that we're not spending money on healthcare. We're spending a lot of money. It's just that we're not spending it wisely. Lack of access to care, the age wave in American society, and escalating cost, I think, are 3 fundamentally important storms that we have to face in this first phase of the 21st century. So how should we be responding as rehabilitation professionals? So, the gathering clouds. The first I want to talk about is clinical practice. And here I want to go to neurosurgeon and healthcare author Atul Gawande. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Gawande's writings, but I just love his stuff. He writes in professional journals and he writes in the New Yorker on a regular basis. He has cautioned his profession of medicine, and I think his caution also applies to the rehabilitation profession. Gawande has argued that healthcare is changing fundamentally and that the medical profession can no longer be a profession, and I love this phrase, of craftsmen individually brewing plans for whatever patient comes through the door. I mean, I could relate to that as a rehabilitation professional. Have we fallen into the same trap as medicine has, with our focus on practice models that are well suited for the 20th century, but not for the 21st century? Are we ready as rehabilitation professionals for accountable care organizations, for medical homes, and other methods of bundling services that are focused on more coordinated, interdisciplinary, cost-contained care? Fee-for-service practice is going to be a thing of the past, and we better be prepared for these other models of care. Are the rehabilitation professions providing a leadership role in creating and evaluating these models of care? We're talking about chronic disease management and coordinated care. What professions are better suited than the rehab professions? Are we leaders in the developing of these models of care? And if not, why not? What are we waiting for? Gawande argues that people who work in effective systems develop what he refers to as critical system skills. And I want to talk about 3 that he refers to. First, people who are effective in working in systems become interested in data. I know that sounds boring, but I think it's fundamentally important. He argues that people put effort and resources into collecting, refining, and understanding what the data say about their performance as clinicians. They collect these data not because some accrediting body requires them to do it. They collect it because it's fundamentally important to their practice. Secondly, they grow an ability to devise solutions for the problems that are uncovered in the data that they collect. And then thirdly, and I think this is probably the most challenging of the three, they develop the skill to implement these changes on a grand scale, not in just little cottage industries, but on the grand scale. They develop the skill to get their colleagues to go along the whole chain of care, functioning in concert, working in collaboration, and disseminating new knowledge into practice. It's not enough to do the research, publish the article, and hope that practice will change. That's not how change occurs. This involves discipline. It involves belief in standardization, doing things the same way, and trying to reduce your failures in your practice. They involve teamwork, and they involve leadership. There are several examples I can refer to where this is beginning to happen in my profession of physical therapy. I would point to the work that Dudley and others are doing at the University of Pittsburgh. They have developed and they're now implementing standardized physical therapy practice models for the treatment of low back pain. And they're disseminating those practice models and those skills throughout their DPT program, so that the clinicians of tomorrow will come into the field with those skills in their hands. I'll also point to the work of Gerard Brennan and his colleagues out at Intermountain Healthcare in Salt Lake City, where they have integrated a systematic outcomes management system across their entire network of rehabilitation practices. And they're changing practice patterns in Intermountain. I think the challenge is to learn how to diffuse these innovations throughout our practice and throughout our professions. Again, to quote Gowande, the positive deviance. I love that phrase. He argues we should be looking to the top performers, the positive deviance, to understand how to provide what society needs with respect to health care. Better care at lower cost. And he argues the pattern seems to be that places that function most as systems are those that are able to provide better care at lower cost. In other words, better care doesn't have to be the most costly care. And in his writings, he gives example after example. And by a system, we're not talking about the neurologic, the orthopedic, and so forth. That's not what Gowande is talking about. I've talked to others about this topic, and they think, is it the neurologic or the orthopedic system? No, he's talking about diverse people working together to direct their specialized capabilities towards common goals for patients. They're coordinated by design, not by accident, and they acquire the ability to recognize when they've succeeded and when they've failed. As Don Berwick, who was former director of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, has argued, and I quote, "Anyone who understands systems will know immediately that optimizing parts is not a good route to systems excellence," close quotes. And I ask you, are we as professionals focused on optimizing parts, or are we professions that focus on achieving excellence in systems and system skills? Who are the positive deviants in our professions, and why are they? And how can they and what they do be emulated on a broad scale throughout our professional practice? Are clinicians today equipped with the skills that they're going to need to function in contemporary effective healthcare systems? Do we have system skills such as universal standardized measurement across our practice settings, widespread quality improvement and implementation techniques, interprofessional coordination and care management, diffusion of practice innovations and standardized practice models on a large scale in healthcare, health policy leadership for widespread change. Are these the kinds of skills we're focusing on and turning out in our students today? In my view, Gowande is arguing for the development of a skill set that shifts quite dramatically our focus from optimizing parts to focusing on our role in changing systems and changing the way in which we practice in society, to better identify the positive deviance among us in implementing their innovations on a broad scale. Now, efforts have begun in medicine. For example, the Healthcare Improvement Institute that Berwick founded not too long ago opened what they referred to as its Open School, free online courses in systems skills like outcome measurement, quality improvement, leadership. And when they opened their doors online, they expected to attract a few hundred medical students, and instead 45,000 enrolled. I ask you, why can't we build an open school for rehabilitation professionals to teach these kinds of skills? And then, as one of my colleagues said, if we build it, will they come? And that does worry me, because I don't think we've yet instilled in our students the hunger, in our therapists, the hunger for these kinds of system skills. And in my profession, we're still very much a clinical technique-oriented culture, not a culture that's focused on system skills. Now, I think there are examples, and I'm going to point to those that I am most familiar with, and which are the ones that we've been working on. Since 2000, our institute at BU has collaborated with CARF, the Commission on the Accreditation of Rehab Facilities, and twice a year we offer a conference specifically focused on transforming outcomes data into management information. The effort was led by my late colleagues Steve Haley and Mary Slavin from our institute. And this course has attracted hundreds of rehab professionals. We offer it once on the East Coast and then once in Arizona. And they come to the workshop and we provide them with real data that they can use to learn how to manipulate and interpret and use data and then take those skills back into their practice settings. Now, the focus is on CARF accreditation, but the principles are the same of what I've been talking about. Ironically, over the years that we've been offering this, the most challenging group of clinicians to get to come to these kinds of courses have been physical rehabilitation professionals. We have been much more successful in other areas. So I ask you, are our schools preparing future therapists with the critical system skills that they're going to need to succeed in today and in future practice models? Are these competencies incorporated into our accreditation standards? And if not, why not? Are we focused more on the quantity of students that we're turning out than the skills of the students that we're turning out? Does our professional education programs focus on the development of system skills that we're going to need? Now, I will say I am encouraged by some of the signs that I see. Just recently, I was out at the University of Southern California, and some of the faculty who were in Tampa when I talked about these issues in June, they have already begun developing techniques for incorporating system skill development in their Doctor of Physical Therapy program at USC. And for those of you who know physical therapy, you know it's the #1 ranked program in the country today and has been for a long time. They were right on this. They had me come out there and I met with both their academic and their clinical faculty, and they've begun workshop planning to figure out how they can develop the skills, system skills, into their DPT program. I see that as a very promising development. The growing thunder of changing research priorities. Quality assessment and continuous quality improvement that I was talking about that we need to do, these are critical system skills and they're knowledge-driven enterprises. Effectively functioning in the healthcare marketplace requires that patients, employers, and other consumers have good information for decision-making, including knowledge about the performance of health providers, the plans, and the efficacy, the effectiveness, and the cost effectiveness of health services that we provide, both new and established services. Do we know enough about what works in our rehabilitation clinical practices, for what conditions, under what circumstances, and at what cost to improve the quality of rehabilitation care? I can't tell you the number of times over my career I have heard people in my field say that our goal must be to prove that what we do works. And it worries me greatly. To me, that is never our goal. Our goal must be to find out what works, at what cost, for what outcomes, for what patients, under what circumstances, so we can focus on what is effective and pull away from what is not and develop new, more effective techniques. And stop trying to prove what we do works. Not all that we do is effective, and we have to accept that and get on with it. And quit being so insecure that somehow our profession is going to be destroyed if people realize some of what we do is not effective. Get over it. Now, there's some times are tight in terms of research funding. I know that. But the Affordable Care Act from 2010 created some new opportunities. One that I want to talk about tonight is the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, or PCORI. It's a not-for-profit corporation, and it is charged explicitly to fund comparative clinical effectiveness research. Comparative effectiveness research is specifically designed to inform healthcare decision-making, to provide evidence on the effectiveness, the benefits, and yes, the harms of different treatment options. By next year, they're going to have over $500 million a year for PCORI-funded research projects. And scientists who will engage in comparative effectiveness research and other forms of innovative health services and health policy research are going to need to embrace a broad range of methodological competencies in order to be successful in competing for these research funds. And they're going to involve skills beyond the traditional research skills that we have typically taught our future researchers. I've listed some of them here. Pragmatic versus standard randomized clinical trials. In practice-based research networks that will have to be developed. The analysis of electronic medical records and other large-scale integrated databases. The development and analysis of data from clinical registries and sophisticated computer simulations. And yes, I should also note the development of improved outcomes measurement, what we do. Toward this end, a little commercial. As Gloria mentioned, Boston University, we do host the Boston Rehabilitation Outcomes Measurement Network. This is funded by NIH, the National Center for Medical Rehab Research, and it's quite unusual in its mission and its intent. Our mission is not to do research in outcomes measurement. Our mission is to assist other rehabilitation scientists in developing, testing, refining, and improving outcome measures through pilot grants that we offer. We have a visiting scientist program. We do consultation. We do workshops. The whole focus is on helping rehabilitation scientists to develop and use better outcome measures in their research. Last summer, for example, we hosted a national workshop where people both came to Boston, and also we did webcasting on disability-related comparative effectiveness research. It was very successful. We had some outstanding leaders in the field come in, spend a day, and we attracted a lot of people. It's these kinds of events that I think we're going to need in the future. Researchers are going to have to focus on answering questions relevant to typical clinician and patient decision-making. That's going to require sophisticated understanding of the diversity of the communities in which we practice, the cultures in which we practice, the patient perspectives, the practice settings, the clinical contexts required to recruit and retain the appropriate settings, the practices, and the participants to develop and to use these kinds of study networks. PCORI, if you look at the guidelines for PCORI grants, they're very different than the NIH guidelines. They're requiring these kinds of developments. So I ask you, are rehabilitation researchers prepared to not only participate in, but to lead these kinds of health services, health policy, and comparative effectiveness research endeavors? In my profession of physical therapy, I am absolutely confident we know how to develop and nurture a cadre of clinical researchers. We've done it over the past 30 years. I recall early in my career how people were running around saying, we don't have enough clinical researchers in physical therapy. We need them tomorrow because we need to do this research. It takes time, but the foundation for physical therapy research 30 some years ago began to fund the development of a cadre of clinical researchers. And today, those researchers are competing at the NIH and competing extremely successfully. We know how to do it. I think a somewhat different set of research skills are going to be needed in the rehab professions, in addition to those of traditional clinical science. Not in place of, but in addition. We need to direct some of the resources for training tomorrow's clinical researchers to develop a cadre of rehab scientists who can compete at the highest level to conduct health services and health policy research relevant to the rehabilitation professional practices. I fear we're going to leave it to others, and we do that at our jeopardy. We know how to create and how to nurture scientists. We need to shift our focus to develop the capacity of scientists to do health services and health policy research relevant to rehabilitation. Yes, this will take some time. It won't happen tomorrow. But as I look back to where we were 30 years ago, I'm astounded at how quickly progress was made in the development and the nurturing of clinical scientists in rehabilitation. So we need to redouble our efforts and create a new cadre of scientists. Now, I am encouraged. Since June, the Foundation for Physical Therapy Research, the board of directors, passed the creation of centers of physical therapy, health services, and health policy research. And they've currently started fundraising $3 to $5 million for the creation of the first Center for Physical Therapy Health Services Research. This is a huge step forward, in my view, for the profession of physical therapy. I think we need to see more of that in rehabilitation. To do less, I think, is to put ourselves in peril. Now, this is not unique to the rehab professions. I want to quote here Michael Crowe, president of Arizona State University. He's argued today we need to understand that progress in healthcare results not just from the scientific breakthroughs, the kind that we get from the NIH, but from knowing how to integrate those advancements with technological, behavioral, social, and cultural shifts. Examples include understanding the impact of behavior on health, our understanding of the behavior change literature, and our ability to influence not only the behavior of our patients, but clinicians. Crowe argues that in order to move toward this, the NIH model of research is obsolete. And he says it won't serve us sufficiently well in the 21st century. He agrees that we need the fundamental Biomedical Systems Research Institute, today's NIH, but he argues that we need two others as well. One that focuses specifically on the development of health outcomes research methodology. Those of you who do health outcomes research of any type know that it's very challenging to get funding from NIH to do this kind of research. And then lastly, he argues we need a health transformation research institute, how to deliver health care in a way that stays affordable and effective for our nation. And organizations like PCORI, I think, are moving in that direction. Flashes of lightning. In my view, storms can either bring a deluge that destroys all in its path, like Sandy, or if faced directly and prepared for, can be weathered and make us even stronger. And in my view, in the coming decades, my vision is for rehab professions that face the growing challenge that our society is going to face, not only with our patients, but in society as a whole. The Institute of Medicine in 2007 issued a report, The Future of Disability in America, and in that report they argued, and I quote, "How will Americans individually and collectively make the choices that will help define the future of disability in America? Will our country commit to the actions needed to limit the development and the progression of physical and mental impairments in late life, promote good health for children as well as young adults with early onset disabling conditions, and reduce environmental barriers for people with existing impairments," close quote. The challenge for us as healthcare professionals, I believe, is to ask how we, individually and collectively as professions, make the choices that will help define the future of disability in America. I think we have a critically important role to play. As New York Times columnist David Brooks wrote, and I quote, "Most successful young people don't look inside themselves and then plan a life. They look outside and they find a problem which summons their life. Most people," Brooks argues, "don't form a self and then lead their life. They're called by a problem, and the self is constructed in response to that problem." And I believe the same can be said of professions. I believe that's what, in my field, our foremothers in fact did, starting with Mary McMillan. The early history of physical therapy is filled with examples of how our foremothers looked outside of their professions and focused on problems that were critical to their society and summoned their professional lives to address them, such as the Reconstruction aides in World War I, or the physiotherapists who responded to the polio epidemics in the 1920s and the 1930s. Lack of access to care, the age wave in American society, and escalating costs, I think, are the comparable storms that we are facing at the start of the 21st century. So I ask you, how will we respond? Will we stand on the rise of ground of our self-identity, our self-confidence as professionals, and position ourselves with other professions to face the current clouds on the horizon? Or will we huddle together for warmth in the low places of our traditional comfort zone? I think the choice is ours. Thank you.
Hi, Alan. I have one question. I'm wondering if you think that there's any place for the growth of preventive physical therapy, sort of prehabilitation. And I've noticed every time I go up to the Ryan Center with a new injury, I come away with a new set of exercises, and they all work. And I've asked some of the people up there whether there might be some prospect for people addressing issues before they get injured.
Sure.
But I'm thinking that one of the problems might be is that there's no system for that. There's no money for it.
Right. Dennis, I think you've put your finger on the answer. You've both asked the question and answered the question, and I appreciate that. But I think the problem is we live in a fee-for-service healthcare system. And as long as that's the system in which we're practicing, professionals will focus on those services that are funded. Now, there are the beginnings of networks that are more prospective in their approach to payments, such as the Kaiser Network and so forth, where you're seeing much more emphasis on preventive services. The fields of rehabilitation are very prepared, and you also see it in the school systems. Many of the rehab professions do a great deal of preventive work in the school systems today. So there are examples, but I think that's the kind of change that we will see as the system of healthcare in our society begins to change. And as soon as the shackles are taken off professionals so that they don't have to function under rigid, regulated fee-for-service constraints, I think there'll be much more potential for creativity. If we're wise enough to take advantage of that, that's partly what I fear, is that we may stand by the side and see others do that instead of get involved. And I think that kind of change is envisioned in the Affordable Care Act. That's where they're trying to move. It's going to take us time. I mean, it's not going to be pretty, but I think it's a start moving in that direction. Bob.
Alan, I was thinking about the role of professionalization and how that is evolving, and the responsibility of the profession to advance itself, if you will. And the issue that popped into my mind was the old saying that war is too important to be left to the generals. And I want to provocatively ask you whether some of this stuff is perhaps best not done by a profession itself. And maybe it fell into the triad that you quoted from Michael Crowe. If you took the NIH and split it up, and you said there's a sort of more science base, and then there is a sort of applications, better outcome measures, and then there's what I would think of as the systems part.
Right.
And, I think you're a perfect example of somebody who has moved from the standard education or the standard track to look at outcome measures. And I wonder whether the third level is not best served by people who aren't in the profession, systems, operations management people, systems engineers, even, heaven help us, business people who actually look at this stuff. Because quite frankly, most people in the profession have gone through educational systems that in no way can cover all of that. And so we may want to introduce some concepts into the education system, but not expect the people coming through that system to actually be able to get to that end of the spectrum.
Yeah, it is a provocative thought. It requires a great deal of confidence to put that kind of responsibility in the hands of people outside of your field. So I think there's a lot of anxiety about that for that reason. But I also think we need to change the culture of how we practice as healthcare professionals, and at least in my view, make the development and use of some of those system skills that I talked about and that Gawande talks about as part of the culture of healthcare professionals, so that they're not seen as separate. The model that you're describing puts them outside of that. And I think particularly with technology today, we have the technology available today to standardize information that's collected for every patient that comes through the door that's seen by a rehabilitation professional. We haven't done it, but the technology is available. The will and the culture is not there. Everyone still does it, and they're all in different ways, so we can't put information together. We can't ask questions about what's going on in our practices. So I think at one level, I think it's important that it becomes part of the culture of practice. Now at the research level, clearly we're talking about interdisciplinary collaboration, and you need those experts. Just like in clinical research, you see all kinds of interdisciplinary collaboration. Not everyone develops all the skills. You go out and get the skills that you need, but you still involve the professionals in doing that work. So it's probably going to end up to be a combination. But on the practice side, I think it needs to become part of the culture. So it's not seen, right now it's seen as something separate from clinical practice, and I think it has to become an integral part of clinical practice. Just like other business does it. Most businesses intimately look at the inputs and the throughputs and the outputs of what they're doing. We don't do it. And I've never understood why.
Hi, Alan. Thank
Hi,
you
Sally.
for that. Being from the mental health world, we're very interested in how healthcare reform is going to roll out, and everyone in the mental health world is talking about the integration of healthcare and mental health care. And I wonder if you have any kind of bold, overarching thoughts about, what's going to happen as mental health and physical health professions try to integrate and deliver care, especially to the group of individuals that we're interested in, which is people with severe psychiatric disabilities.
Yeah. Well, to be honest with you, I worry greatly about them and the extent to which we're going to be able to meet their needs. As I look back at some of the changes in the care of psychiatric patients during my career, we don't have a very good track record. I remember in the 70s when we did the deinstitutionalization movement, where this was supposed to be really an advancement of getting people out of warehouses to really care for their needs in the community. We did a great job of the first part, of getting them out, and then we did a crappy job of meeting their needs in the community, and we just really dropped the ball. So I'm worried, but I will say that one of the biggest concerns that I see in the care of psychiatric patients is that there is no coordination whatsoever in the healthcare system today. So to the extent that the system moves toward embracing coordination, we have a chance, because without coordination, it's not going to be effective. So I think we have a chance, and actually mental health may be a good model for testing some new systems for coordination of care. But I'm worried about it. I'm very worried about it for many different reasons.
This is on. You can't even tell when you're using it. I was just wondering, you mentioned how you went down to USC and talked to them and how they've already started to implement some of these techniques. I was just wondering if you knew any of the specifics of how they're doing that.
Too soon to tell, but what was really interesting to me is that Jim Gordon, who heads up the PT program at USC, brought together all of the clinic directors. They have a faculty practice, they have the hospital practices, they have the key clinical players who are clinical faculty in their DPT program, brought them together with their academic faculty, and we started talking about, okay, this is the vision. How do we actually do it? How do we integrate this into the curriculum? What his big fear is, he didn't want it to become something that was ghettoized, because then it wouldn't be embraced as important. And the analogy that he used, which I thought was really interesting, was 15 years ago, it was very innovative to try to bring evidence-based practice into clinical curricula. That, many of you will remember, that was a big deal. It's now been quite routinely incorporated into the curricula of clinical programs. And what he's envisioning is trying to do the same thing in developing system skills. So we talked about, and one of the things I argued, that if you want to teach a clinical technique to a physical therapy student, what do? You not only teach them something in the classroom, but you put it into a clinic, and you get them in the clinic developing those skills. So I said, well, why don't you do the same thing for system skills? You bring in data, and you begin to teach them how to manipulate data to ask questions about practice, and teach that skill as an integral part of the curriculum. And then you begin to send students to clinics that are doing that, so they can go out and see how clinicians are doing it the same way we do it to see clinical techniques. We send them into practice, hopefully so that they'll get a chance to work on it in a real practice environment. I think the same thing needs to be done for teaching clinical skills. We can't teach unless we start doing it. So that's where I would begin. And I think that's the direction in which they're heading, but it's early. It was just a week and a half ago. Yeah, Colleen.
Al, do you think that we hurt ourselves as a profession, such as the PT Foundation, to develop PT-oriented centers versus a broader center that uses integrated data and looks at all the care delivered to the individual?
Well, there's no question that getting involved in more integrated centers is going to be the way to go. But what I saw in clinical science, in physical therapy, and over the past 30 years, is that when you have something to offer to the larger team, they're willing to embrace you. And so my feeling is, develop the skills so you have something to bring to the table. And then you'll have a reason to get to the table. So it's probably not the ideal way to do it, but I worry that it's going to be very difficult to really become instrumental unless you really have something special to offer. No one was inviting physical therapists to become top-notch clinical researchers at the NIH. There was no invitation to do that. But the field decided that it was important, it was going to do it, and now it's the highest funded group in the National Center for Medical Rehab Research among all the researchers who try to get funding from that agency. And that was in 25, 30 years. And no one was inviting them to do that. They kind of forced their way in, and I think that's the way you have to do it. And it's because they had something to offer. And now they're integrating in clinical research much more with other professionals because they're embraced, they're invited, they're seen as valuable to get to where one needs to go. And I think the same thing can be, I think the model can work. And I don't know if it will, but I think from a position of strength, you're going to have more success in getting to those at the table. And that we can control. You know, the rehab professions can control that. You don't have to, you can do it.
Other questions? Helen, thank you very much for a thought-provoking lecture.
My pleasure.
Thank you.